We're now moving on to topic 1.5. Now, before we start on the booklet, I want to give you some general information about graphing and perhaps enrich the lesson a little bit with some of this information. And by the way, good things to know. First off, as we deal with the graphs, one of the main things we come across is this standard form of the linear equation in two variables, x and y. And we call that often Formula 1, standard form of the linear equation in two variables. If you see it in practice, it would look something like this, where 3 would be the A, 4 would be the B, and the C would be 12. So, standard form. Now, if we take that standard form and we solve for the letter y, I'll do that for you right now. We want to solve for y. So this 3x is on this side of the equation. If we take it over to the other side, that process is called transposing. If we transpose the 3x, because we want to get the 4y by itself, as it crosses the equal sign, the sign changes, and it becomes a negative 3x. And the 12 is still over there. And then if we want to get the y by itself, one of the techniques we're going to study here shortly is we're going to divide everything by the numerical coefficient of the number that's with the letter we're looking for. So we divide everything by 4. And here the 4's cancel out and we get y equals a negative 3/4 x plus 3. And now if we look at equation 2, solving equation 1 for y, it gets in the form of what we call Slope-Intercept Form, where m is the letter to define the slope, and b is the letter we use to define the y-intercept. More on that shortly. But these are two very important equations, and we'll be using some of this in chapter 2 as well. Standard form and slope-intercept form of a linear equation in two variables. Now, another thing that I'm developing here, and it's called the X and Y intercept Teechart. Well, if you look over here, this is sort of like a T. And if you put in this spot, under the X is 0. And I guess I had that incorrect there. That should be a Y. Under the Y, a 0. This special Teechart will be used to help in graphing, as you'll see very shortly. So this is, again, just background, something you should know. So if I have something in standard form, the use of this X and Y intercept Teechart is going to be very useful. So let's work it out. Here we're saying the value for x is going to be 0. So we put a 0 where the x is. 3 times 0 is 0. So this becomes a 0. We divide both sides by 4, and we have the value for y now is 3 that we put right there. So we're just substituting the ordered pair 0 here, and then solving for the letter y, which is 3. By the way, this ordered pair, which is written x comma y, is if you put it in this equation, makes the statement true. And now if we make y a 0, this becomes a 0. We're going to divide both sides by 3, and this becomes a 4. We now have two ordered pairs. Now if we plot them, and we're going to go over this, or we've been over it in class, you start at the origin and put the x in first, which is 0. You come up and put a dot then on 3. That's this ordered pair plotted on a graph. And now this ordered pair is going to be 4, 0. So you would do the 4 first, and that would be that point. Now what we do once we have 2 points on a graph is we put a line through them. Now this line is the graph of this equation. And notice that there will be an infinite number of ordered pairs all along this, because this goes up this way to infinity and then down that way to infinity. But that line is the representation of that equation. Now an interesting thing is happening also as we look at that line. We see it is crossing the y-axis at this point, and it's crossing the x-axis at that point. And what do you think they call these points where they cross the axes? Well, they call them the intercepts. It's where it's intercepting the y-axis. That's the y-intercept. And this one is the x-intercept. And these are sometimes written in a special way that will say 0, b. This is the shorthand for the y-intercept. If you write this one, a, 0, that's the shorthand for writing the x-intercepts. And another thing I want to mention is that often when we see the ordered pair, it's in this form, x, y. But every once in a while you'll see it in the form of a, b, where the b refers, interestingly, to the, in this case, the y-intercept, and the a, when the other item is 0, is the x-intercept. So some background material going on. And I think that will wind up this particular part. We also at this time want to introduce the rectangular coordinate plane. That is where we graph things. We have a horizontal axis, that's called x, a vertical axis, that's called y, and they intersect. And actually these are two number lines, where the points on this side are positive, to the left are negative, and the ones above are positive, below are negative. Now this divides the plane into 4 regions or quadrants. And we label the quadrants starting here as 1, Roman numeral, 2, 3, and 4. The point of intersection is called the origin, and the coordinates are 0, 0. Now, we can also figure out as to, by an ordered pair, where they're going to be in terms of their sign. So if we have both positive, that's going to be the first quadrant. Now if x is negative and y is positive, that's the second quadrant. If they're both negative, that's the third quadrant. And then if x is positive, but y is negative, that's the fourth quadrant. So these are various things you're going to be asked to do. Okay, let's start with our examples now in the actual lesson. I believe it's 1 to 7 or 8. I think it's 7. That are fill-ins. So based on the lesson and the vocabulary, and in the last class, we were able to finish them. So I'm not going to do a lot of the examples in the book. We did them in class. And the answers, again, are at the end of the chapter. So you can check your work. But just to go over some of the theory of what goes on. This is an ordered pair that must be in this order. We always do the x-coordinate first, starting at the origin. And this is 3, so we're going to go to the right, positive 3. And then we go to the y-coordinate, which is 2, up 2. Put a dot right there. We often write the coordinate after it to indicate what we've done. And this is a -4 and a -2. So we start at the origin, go to 4, -4, and then down 2. Notice they're both negative, so that puts us in the third quadrant. And then this one, we can sometimes have fractions, -1/2. So that will be going over to -1/2 and then up to 5, which is about there. And that puts us in the second quadrant. And then if we had one like this, 0, 2, 0, 2, right there. And that would be your y-intercept, which sometimes could be written as 0, b. That's your y-intercept, the standard form for writing the y-intercept. And then another one would be, let's say, -2, 0. So that would be starting at 0, going to -2, and staying at 0. So -2, 0. And this would be your x-intercept written in the form a, 0. So you're going to get many like that, and you're going to try your skill and give it a good shot. Okay, now as we go on to number 18, they're asking us to graph. And the key to graphing at this stage is to make a T-chart. And this is the standard T-chart, and you're going to put in often these 3 numbers, -1, 0, 1. And for all of these, they would be these 3 numbers. Could you have used other numbers? And the answer is yes. But you want to stick in close to the origin and not make them so they go off your graph. So we just substitute. So if x is a -1, -1 and a -1 is -2. If x is 0, y is a -1. If x is 1, here we put a 1. 1 minus 1 is 0. Now notice we happen to have both the x and the y-intercepts here. This is the y-intercept, this is the x-intercept. All right, let's continue solving and then we'll graph. So for this one, if we put in x as a -1, I have to watch it. -1 times -2 is a +2. If x is 0, -2 times 0 is 0. And this is going to be 1 times that is -2. Now, this one I rewrote so that this form would be in slope-intercept form, because these other two were that way. So, we have here, it's a -1. So if x is a -1, watch this. The opposite of a -1 is a +1. 1 plus 4 is 5. If x is a 0, this is a 4. If x is a +1, that's going to be a negative of a +1. This becomes a -1, and that then becomes a 3. So as you sketch these, and in your homework log, we want you to sketch them, you're going to go -1, -2. So -1, -2, you have a dot right there. Then you have 0, -1. There's 0, there's -1 right there. And then 1, 0, right there. And you have 3 points, and they should be in a straight line, and I probably should use a ruler. All right, for this one, it's going to be -1, 2, -1, up 2, dot there, 0, 0, and then a 1, and a -2 there. Oh, I did better on that one. So again, we're looking for sketches of these. So a -1, and then a 5, 1. A dot there, 0, 4, right there, and then 1, 3. Now, an interesting thing as we look at these 3 graphs, that again, over here was the slope, and in this case the slope was positive and the graph goes up. Anytime you see a graph going up like this, its slope is positive. And that checks out. Here the slope is negative. So for negative slopes, the line starts high, and as you go to the right, goes down. So here the m is positive. M is slope. Here, m is negative. And there it's negative again. So if it starts low and goes up as you go from left to right, that's positive slope. If it starts high and goes down, that's negative slope. Again, there's lots of stuff in here, and you're going to give it your best shot and review, do the work, the practice. It's all laid out for you. And let's see if there's something else we can put up for you. No, I only put 20 examples. You're going to have plenty to do in practice. And keep in mind that a week from today, we're going to have our test on Chapter 1. Our lesson on Thursday is going to be equations. So we're just going to have that one lesson as a review of equations. I have a video on equations on this site. Go down the list a little bit, and if you write that up, 2 sides of a page, remember we said we'll give you a bonus point. Okay, that'll wind it up.